Hi, in this video we'll be creating and customizing an Android mascot in 3D using the free program MagicaCSG. This is a complete beginner's tutorial, so you don't need any prior knowledge in MagicaCSG or even in any 3D program. If you don't have MagicaCSG installed on your computer, you can find the link in the description to download it. It's just a zip file, so you unzip it and you run it. Do make sure to check the download page for the requirements needed to run the program. I've got more tutorials coming, so make sure you subscribe to be notified. Okay, once you have MagicaCSG open, here's what you see in front of you. The big area in the middle is the viewport. This is where you can look at your scene and work with it. First thing you want to know is how to control your 3D view. You hold down your right mouse button to orbit the view around your scene. And you hold down the middle mouse button to pan your view. And finally, you can use your scroll wheel to zoom in and out. Here's the reference image we'll be using to create our 3D Android mascot. As you can see, it's a simple object, and I picked it out for this tutorial. It's usually a good idea when you want to create a 3D object to try and break it down into its basic shapes. In this case, you can see that it's mostly cylinders, rounded cylinders, and spheres and half spheres. So that's mostly what we're going to be using. Okay, we're going to start by creating the body for our mascot. And the first thing you want to do is delete this default cube. So you just click on it to select it, and then you hit delete to remove it. Next, we're going to come over here to the stroke panel. In MagicaCSG, the basic shapes that compose your object are called strokes. Right now we have the cube stroke selected. We're going to switch over to a cylinder stroke, and we're going to hit the plus button to add it into our scene. So now we have a cylinder in our scene. Next, I want to make it bigger. I want to enlarge it. I want to scale it up because right now it's pretty small. So I'm going to come over here to my gizmo. This entire thing with the circles and the lines is called the gizmo. And these cubes here are the scale handles. So I'm going to grab one and I'm going to drag out. And this isn't what I wanted. It's only scaling up on one axis. It's not scaling up this way or that way. And the reason it's doing that is that over here in the gizmo panel, we have the X2 mode selected. And that means that whatever axis you choose, it'll only scale that axis in both directions. So what we're going to do is switch over to the XYZ mode. And by the way, if you notice down here at the bottom of the screen, you always have your hint and your hotkey. So when I put my mouse here in the middle, it tells you that how you can rotate your view and how you can pan it. And when I hover over anything, it shows you what it does, and it shows you a keyboard shortcut if there is one. So here, the scale modes can be changed with the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 on your keyboard. So I switch over to XYZ mode, or I hit the number 3 on my keyboard. And let's undo the scaling that we did. And now let's scale up. And it'll scale up uniformly on all axes. So I want to scale it up to around 400 units. You can see the size here. In fact, let me just go ahead and type 400, enter, and again 400 and enter. And now our cylinder is 400 units high, wide, and deep. Cool, so we have our body added. Now I'm going to set the color. I've already picked out the color from the reference image using a color picker, but you can just do it manually if you want. You come over here to the stroke panel, you select your stroke first, you click here on the color, and you can set the color as you wish. Now, since I already have the color picked out, I'm just going to enter the hex code for that color. So if you don't want to change your color manually, you can come over here and click the show values button. And since I know what the hex code is, I'm just going to add it. So A4CA39. And I hit enter. And that's the green from the reference image. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the name for this stroke. Come over here to my scene panel. Up top, I have my list of layers. And there's only one layer right now. And that one layer contains only one stroke, which is our cylinder. Now I can right click and I can set a name for my layer. I don't really need to because I'm not going to use any other layers, but let me go ahead and add it, Android mascot, enter. Then I can select the stroke and then I can right click it, body, and enter. It's a good idea to keep your strokes named and organized, so when your scene becomes complex, you can easily find your way around. So this is our body. We're going to come back to it. Let's leave it as is for now. Actually, I'm going to raise it up a little because it's very low to the ground. So let me grab the Z-axis handle. Let me just raise it up a little. Around here is fine, I think. Alright, next up we're going to create the arms. So I have my body stroke selected. What I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate it, and then I'm going to adjust the duplicated stroke into the shape of the arm. The easiest way to duplicate in MagicaCSG is to select the stroke and then to move it, but while you move it you hold down the Shift key. So I'm going to hold down Shift and then I'm going to move it out, and this creates a duplicate stroke. Oh, here it's clipping out of the scene because our scene has a finite size. Anyway, so I've duplicated it. You'll notice here in the layers, I now have a second stroke named body. So first let's change the name to arm. There we go. Now we can tell them apart easily. You can just select them over here. And I want to scale it down to size. So let's change the scale mode to XY, or hit 4 on our keyboard. What this does is when you scale down, it scales down in the XY axes, which is the front and the sides, but not the height. So I'm going to scale it down. I think this is good. Yeah, this looks fine. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make it rounded, because in our reference image, the arms are very rounded on the ends. So the way we can do that is we can change the stroke property. And we do that by going over here to the stroke panel with our stroke selected. And you'll notice here the selected stroke has a number of attributes or properties that we can adjust. And by default, strokes have a round value of 10. So what we're going to do here is we're going to increase the round value all the way up to 100. And this makes our cylinder very rounded on the ends. In fact, it's like a half circle on each end, which is exactly what we want in this case. Now, let's switch our camera to the front view. You could do this and try and adjust your view, but the easiest way to do it is to use this gizmo down here. This is the viewport gizmo. The same way we have our stroke gizmo, which shows up on our selected strokes, we have our viewport gizmo down here, also called the view cube. And you can just left click on this and drag to adjust your viewport. But you can also just click on the side that you want to see, for example, this 45-degree angle here, and it snaps the view to it. Okay, in this case I want to see the front view. So I click on this square here, the front face, and it snaps my view to the front view. Okay, and I can zoom out and I can pan, and as long as I don't rotate, I stay in that front view. So I'm going to use this front view to easily adjust the position of my arm and to also fix the size a little more. I'm going to first position it, so I'm going to move it out this way. In fact, I realize now that it's a little big, so I'm going to scale it down a little more. You know what, let's set it to 100, 100. I think this is fine. So 1/4 the width of the body. Let's bring it out this far out. And now we want to make it a little shorter, because on our reference image it only comes down this far. So the way we do that is we switched over to the X1 mode. And the X1 mode lets you scale only in the direction you pick. So I'm scaling on the Z axis, but unlike X2, which scales from that side as well, it'll only scale from the side that I choose. So I'm going to scale it up to around here. Alright, so that's our arm scaled to size and positioned properly. Now we want to make the other one, the right arm on the other side. This is our left arm. I could duplicate this and set it on the other side, but there's an easier way with the mirror setting. So with my stroke selected, I can just go over here to the stroke panel and I click the M button. And now we have another arm, which is a mirror of this one. So in fact, if I move this one, the other one moves symmetrically. Let me undo that. Alright, so now we have two arms. Now let me explain real quick how mirrors work in MagicaCSG. First of all, I'm going to turn on the mirror plane which is this button down here, or Control M. So you click it and it shows you the mirror plane. This is the axis of symmetry in MagicaCSG for all mirrored objects. So in fact, if I deselect here and if I click on the copy, if I click on the mirrored objects, the original stroke is selected. So this tells us that the mirrored stroke is virtual. It doesn't actually exist in the scene. In fact, if you look here in the list of objects, it doesn't show up. Only the original shows up. Alright? So this is the first thing. Also, the mirror always is placed on the center of the x-axis. You can't mirror on the y-axis or the z-axis, and you cannot move the location of the mirror. And the mirror is just one plane for the entire scene, so you can't have individual mirror locations for individual strokes. It's just one, and any mirrored strokes will be mirrored on this plane. So for this reason, if you know that your object is going to have mirrored shapes, mirrored strokes, you gotta make sure that your central objects are always going to be in the center of the x-axis. That's why I make sure my cylinder is on x0 so that my arms are equally placed on either side of it. Alright, and one last thing, mirrors always work from left to right, which is why I created the arm on the left side. In fact, if I were to turn off mirror, if I were to create the right arm instead, and I mirror that, it wouldn't show. It's there, I can select it, but it wouldn't show until I move it to the left. See that? So mirrored strokes always go from left to right. So always put your original strokes on the left side, and then enable the mirror on them, and they'll show up on the right side. And that's how mirrors work in MagicaCSG. Okay, let's turn off the mirror plane again. Now let's do the legs, and let's switch to front view. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna duplicate the arm stroke into the leg stroke. And because the arm stroke is mirrored, when we duplicate it, it will duplicate a mirror stroke as well. So we're gonna duplicate the arm using this corner handle here that comes between this arrow and this arrow. So hold down Shift and click and drag this, and this way you're duplicating on two axes. I mean, you're moving on two axes. And we're gonna place it around here. Since the leg is only half as long as the arm in the original design, we're gonna align our gizmo to the center, to the bottom of the body cylinder. Let's see. I think this spacing looks good. Yeah, that looks good. I'm gonna select it, gonna go over here to the stroke panel, to the scene panel, right click, and I'm gonna name it leg. And as you can see, we didn't need to cut the leg stroke down to size, we just shoved it up there inside the body cylinder. That's perfectly fine in MagicaCSG. Okay, next up, if we take a look at the original design, the reference design, you'll notice that the bottom of the body is rounded, just like the arms and the legs. But our shape is not round enough, so we're gonna round that up. We're gonna do it the same way we did with the arms, which is we come over here to the stroke properties. This time I'm gonna increase the roundness to 30. An easy way to set attributes is to just click in here and set the value you want and press enter. Alright, so now the bottom is rounded. But you'll notice that the top is also rounded, and we don't want that because in the original design the top is flat. It's like cut off. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut the top of the shape. With the body stroke selected, let's duplicate it up, shift and drag. And let's switch to front view. Let's align it right with itself to the top of it. Let's set the roundness attribute to 0 so that it's sharp. And then we're going to come to the stroke panel here, and we're going to set the operation from union to subtract. So we click that, and it looks like it's hidden. And over here in our list it's called body, and at the end it says sub, which means it's a subtract stroke. And I'm going to move this around, and you're going to see how it affects the shapes. Alright, check this out. See, so it's cutting the shapes, the other strokes. It's cutting the other strokes in its own shape. And the way substrokes work is they affect any stroke that is above them in the same layer. So this substroke is going to affect the leg stroke, the arm stroke, and the body stroke. If I were to move it up with the arrow and put it up here, right under body, you'll notice it no longer affects the arm stroke, and it won't affect the leg stroke either. Alright, let's delete it. Let's recreate it. Set it to sub. Alright, so it's right here. Oh, and if you deselect it and you don't know how to select it again, you can just click it in the list of strokes. So that's an easy way to select it. And this is another reason why it's important to name all of your strokes. So we're going to keep this to body sub because we're using it to subtract from the body. Okay, so how are we actually going to use it to cut the body? Well, we're going to actually scale the body cylinder up. So with X1 mode selected, we scale it up, and you see it starts being cut by the other one. Now you're gonna notice these artifacts, and these artifacts are because the two strokes are the exact same width. So where they intersect, there's gonna be some weird clipping. So we can resolve that by scaling up the body stroke. So we'll just switch to XY mode or hit 4 on your keyboard, and we're going to scale it up. So now we're scaling up the substroke. Okay, now we can't tell how big it is, but you can switch back to union operation and you can see how it looks. Switch back to sub. Another way to see invisible strokes is to turn on the bounding box down here, the wireframe. If you click it, you can see the shape of your stroke. But I usually keep it turned off just to reduce the visual clutter. Now you can see that the body cylinder is cut on the top. Let's switch back to front view, and here's the result. It looks pretty similar to our reference image. Next up is creating the head. We're gonna use the body cylinder again to create the head. So shift and drag up, and we're gonna turn it from a cylinder stroke into a sphere stroke. So now it's a sphere stroke. It's clipping because it's going above the size of the scene, but it's an actual sphere. Only it's stretched because it inherited the size of the cylinder. So we're going to turn it into a perfect sphere. We go here to the size, and we set the Z size into 400, and now it's an actual sphere. Alright, now we need to cut it down the middle. So we go up to the stroke panel here, and we're gonna half it on the Z axis. So now it's halved on the Z axis, only we want it turned around. So now we're gonna come here to the flip menu here, and we're gonna flip it on the Z axis, and now it's flipped. Let's switch to the front view, and let's adjust the gap just a little. I think this is good. And there, that was a very easy way to make the head. And let's not forget to set the name. Right click, head, enter. Okay, so that's the head done. Let's move on to the antennas. But first, I want to move the whole object down because I'm sick of my shapes clipping off the top of the scene. So we're going to select body, we're going to shift, select head, and that'll select everything here. Another way is to just press Ctrl A, and that'll select all the strokes in this layer. And I'm just going to move everything down. There we go. Alright, so now let's work on the antennas. To make the antennas, I'm going to use the arm stroke because it looks like the most fitting. I'm going to duplicate it using this corner handle, so shift and drag on this. Going to position it roughly up here. Now I want to rotate it, and I want to rotate it on the Y-axis, which is the front to back axis, the green one here. And the easiest way to rotate it is to come here to the rotate menu, open it, go to the Y value, type 45, and enter. And now they're rotated at 45 degrees. Now we want them smaller and thinner, so let's switch to XY mode. Let's thin them down. I think that's good. I think I also want to make them shorter so that they don't poke out the bottom. So let's make them shorter this way. Let's switch to front view and let's position them. That looks good to me. Let's check out the reference image. Okay, well, in the reference image they're closer to the middle and they're a little more vertical. So let's adjust that. Select that. Use this rotation handle. Rotate it a little more vertical. And we move them a little closer. There. I think that looks good. And that's the antennas. Oh, and of course, let's name it. Right click. Antenna. We're almost done with this object. Next up is the eyes. So we're gonna add a sphere stroke. So come up here to the stroke panel, select the sphere type and press plus, and we have a sphere somewhere in there. It's lost inside the head. So let's move it forward. And it's stretched out because it inherited the last selected stroke. So let's fix the size. Let's go here to the size inputs, set it to, let's say 30 by 30 by 30. That's a little small. Let's scale it up. XYZ mode. Let's scale it up a little, just by eye, pun intended. And let's position it. Let's switch to the front view, position it this way. Let's switch to side view, position it on this side. There we go. I think it looks good. Now we're gonna color it white. So just click on the color swatch here. Let's go back to the color picker. Let's turn down the saturation all the way to 0 and the value to maximum, and we get a white color. Then let's set the name, eye, and there we go. Our model is pretty much complete. Now all we need to do is render our scene to get a nice image. First, let's save our file. I can't believe I haven't saved so far. Always save your file often. So save, and now I've saved, and you'll notice the project name is now at the top. Okay, now what's left is to render our scene. To render your scene, you go to the render mode, which is accessible up here. Right now we're in the model mode. You switch over to render mode, or you press F2, and the scene starts rendering immediately. Every time you move the view, the scene starts rendering all over again. You can see that on this progress bar up here. Once it completes, then the render is done, and then you can export it. So first of all, let's set the background color. You go over here in the light panel, and you switch to the display settings, and here you can set your background color. Okay, so I fiddled around until I found a color that I liked. We're gonna set the ground color as well, only let's turn on the ground first. You do that down here with the display ground button. And since we lowered our model all the way down to the ground, it sits nicely on the ground and it casts a shadow. So let's set the ground color. I'm gonna set it to an orangey color to contrast nicely with the green of the model. Next, I'm gonna show you how to change the angle of the light, change the angle of the sun. So you go back here to the lighting, to the light panel, and here you have your sun angle, and this is the vertical angle, and this is the horizontal angle. So this is the pitch, how high or low the sun is. So this is noon, it's right up top, and this is basically sunset. So actually now it's below the horizon. So you can adjust the vertical angle and the horizontal angle. If you want it lit from behind or from the front, I think this is a good angle right here. So yeah, so the scene is always rendering. Whenever you change anything, the render restarts. So let's find a nice angle to render from. In fact, let's change the image size, and you do that up here. So the default is a 960 by 800. We want a full HD wallpaper image. So let's set it to 1920 space 1080, enter. So now that's the size of our render. Let's find a camera angle that we like. Let's wait for the render to finish. Okay, now the render is complete. Now we can export it. And you export the render by coming down here to the camera button, capture image, or you hit number 6 on your keyboard. So let's click that and let's export it. And now it's exported. Let's check it out. And here's our render. If you're still watching all this way, congratulations. Thank you for watching, and that's it for the part 1 of this tutorial. In this first part, you learned how to add strokes, how to adjust their properties, manipulate them, combine them into the shapes that you want, and how to set up your render and export it. In part 2, I will go into more details on how to sort of create textures on your object, and I'll go into more details on the render mode and how to radically improve the quality of your render. So stay tuned for part 2. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. And there will be more tutorials coming even after this 2-part tutorial. So again, thanks for watching and see you next time.